So our most important ingredient is going to be legumes of some sort. Here I've soaked some red lentils for a few hours to get them soft, but it's important to note that you can use almost any kind of legume for this. I've done this with kidney beans, I've done this with chickpeas, other kinds of beans, like mixed beans. Soaking is optional, it usually helps. I've heard it actually improves the nutritional balance, like reducing some carbohydrates and some gas-causing fiber. However, it's optional. I'm using one medium onion. You can use any onion for this. I normally prefer white because of the color, or yellow, but they did not have any of those at the store, so red it is. So this soup is going to begin like any self-respecting soup is going to begin, by sauteing onions in butter. And I think if you're starting a soup without sauteing onions, if not in butter, then some sort of vegan alternative oil, what are you even doing? Like, why are you even bothering to make soup? Like, put some sauteed onions in, you idiot. I'm going to stir those around a bit. So the onions have been going for about 5 minutes now and they're starting to caramelize. Interesting fact, the caramelization of onions and anything is due to a process called the Maillard reaction, in which some of the long carbohydrates are converted into caramelized sugars. And this process is accelerated by higher pH, which means that adding baking soda actually accelerates the process of caramelization. So we can add in a pinch. And this is true for really anything you're trying to caramelize. You can caramelize anything that has sugars. I have sugars, Greg. Could you caramelize me? Next, I'm adding bell peppers. Red, orange, or yellow are fine. I don't really like to use green. They're too bitter. They don't have a lot of sugar. I don't like the flavor that they contribute, but I have used them before, and it's okay. Usually one large bell pepper is fine. I'm going to use two because I just really like bell pepper. So I'm about to add in the chopped bell pepper. However, I want to take advantage of this opportunity because when I add the bell peppers in, it's going to add a lot of moisture. But right now, when it's mostly buttery or oily in the pan, there's an opportunity. And that is that fat-soluble spices are going to disperse their flavors into the soup much more easily if you get them directly in oil. So whatever spices we want to add, let's add them now. The thing that I love about this recipe, and the reason I keep coming back to it again and again, is how frickin' versatile it is. You can take it in completely different culinary directions depending on which spices you add in at this point or at the end. So for example, I'm going to make this into kind of more of a dal flavor, like an Indian flavor. So I'm going to add curry, cumin, cinnamon, and black pepper. However, you could just as easily make this the base for a bean chili, for example, by adding things like, well, cumin again, but chipotle, smoked paprika, etc. You can do an Italian version with Italian herbs. You can do North African. You can really take this in whatever direction you want based on the spices you add. And I almost forgot, this is the point at which we would want to add in our garlic. God's gift to mankind, really. And I actually learned recently that garlic was considered a really taboo kind of spice to use in the US up until after World War II because of its association with Italians and Southern European immigrants. So good frickin' riddance to those days. So I added in my spices and my garlic. I'm cooking that around. If you were going to use carrots, this would also be the time to add carrots. I'm pretty neutral on carrots, and I just forgot to get them at the store. But they're a pretty common thing to add in, and that would be at this point. So I added in my bell peppers, and I'm stirring those around. In retrospect, 2 bell peppers was probably too big for a pot of this size, but whatever. I love bell pepper. If you like it less, use less. So I'm probably really overthinking this, but I think of making soups and stews in kind of 2 phases. The initial phase in which we're building up flavors and building the soup base, and then the second phase in which we're adding our liquids and moisture. So in this phase, I am leaving the lid off, and we want a bunch of the moisture to evaporate out and to have flavors be mingling and sugars caramelizing. When we get to adding in the tomatoes and the other things, that's when we want to put the lid on to try to retain moisture and build up the actual body of the soup. So I got a bunch of tomatoes. I would actually like to have gotten more. You should actually get more than you think is reasonably necessary, because basically I like all of the liquid in this dish to come from the tomatoes. So usually I basically just fill the pot to the brim with tomatoes and only top it off with a bit of water or beer or wine to add some different flavors. So now that that's starting to get to a kind of amorphous gloop texture, now's when I'm gonna want to add in the tomatoes. And I've cut the tomatoes, just, again, like I said, just a bunch of tomatoes. The shape doesn't really matter because they're gonna be like cooked down to liquid, so don't worry, just get a bunch of tomato chunks in there. And by the way, canned tomato is totally fine. I'm just weird, picky, like doing everything from scratch, whatever. So I've stewed that all around, and now I'm going to put the lid on and let it just kind of do its thing for a while. You still want to stir it on occasion to make sure it doesn't burn, but basically you're just going to be producing a lot of liquid, and that'll kind of keep it from burning too much. So that's been going for about 30 minutes, and I've been stirring it, and I actually mashed it with a potato masher. If I were going to use a stick blender, which I wish I had, an immersion blender, whatever you want to call it, now would be the time to do that. But I don't have one, so I'm just going to have to stick with this. I basically want to get rid of as many chunks as possible. So now it's time for our star ingredient, the lentils, or whatever legume you want. So you're just going to pour those in. So I definitely overfilled this a bit, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, that was stupid. Oh well, I'll figure something out. So I just transferred that to a larger pot, and now that's sitting very comfortably. Oh, I almost forgot something very important, and that is salt. So I'm going to add in some salt to taste. Maybe a couple good, maybe 3 pinches. That should do it for now. Can always add more later, can't take it out. And this is a little more soupy than I want. So there's an easy solution to that. I'm just going to leave the lid off, and that'll cook down a bit. Now I'm going to add in some chili peppers. Maybe I should have done this earlier when it was when we had a bunch of oil in there with the onions, but now's a good time. I'm going to use these bad boys. I have no idea what kind of peppers they really are, but they're spicy. And remember, everyone, always spice for the least spice tolerant person who's going to be eating it. You can add more later. So I'm throwing 4 peppers in there, 4 of these little chilies in there, seeds and all. So that's going to be unpleasantly spicy. Maybe. I mean, I like unpleasantly spicy, so I guess that's oxymoron. liking unpleasantly spicy, but whatever. Anyway, I'm just going to bring this up to a notable boil and then let it simmer. And for these tiny red lentils, it usually takes about 30 minutes. Adjust your cook time according to the kind of bean you're using, and you can always just take one out and sample to see if it's still hard or not. These tiny red lentils cook about faster than any other legume, except maybe split peas. Those cook pretty fast too. Chickpeas take a freaking long time. I almost always have a lot of residual toughness in my chickpeas. So just take the time you need. Okay, so I've been letting this cook for about 45 minutes or so. The water has definitely evaporated or been completely absorbed into the lentils. And now we're getting about the consistency I want. Like thick, but not glop. It'll still flow. That's, for me, this is probably one of the best consistencies. Although you can let it get a little thicker and then mash the crap out of it, and then it's like mashed lentils, like a dal. I mean, dal means a million different things, but there are different ways of doing it. I want to add one more secret ingredient, and that is molasses. And I think a lot of people don't know that they like molasses, or they think that they don't like molasses, because molasses on its own kind of doesn't taste very good. It can taste very dark and almost acrid. But when you take a tablespoon of it to mix into an entire pot like this, I think it gets really darn good. So I've added in a couple of tablespoons of molasses. And what it adds is, first of all, a nice rich color that I think makes things look a bit more substantive. It also adds a dark, earthy flavor that really undergirds kind of the rest of the dish, even if you can't quite place it. Yeah, that's just, a lot of people don't know how to use it. I think as just one of a chorus of flavors, it's really nice, like a, I don't know, like singing bass for the rest of the dish. And there we have it, a nice hearty lentil stew, or a dal. And as we went over, just a couple of small changes of spice and ingredients, and you could have a vegetarian chili, or a chana masala, or an Italian chickpea stew, whatever you want. It's incredibly versatile, and I think incredibly easy and trusty once you get used to it. Enjoy.